Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. America is the first modern state formed around the principle of rule by the consent of the governed. So in other words, we have the right of self-rule, and our representatives only govern by our consent. Apparently, President Biden skipped civics because yesterday he went on national television and let America know that the government that serves us, that our government's, quote, patience is wearing thin, end quote. Would you like to see mine? Biden was laying out a new set of policies from the federal government, including heavy-handed mandates in order to increase vaccination rates. He announced a mandate that federal employees get a COVID vaccine, no option for regular testing, no anything for natural immunity, and for healthcare facilities that get Medicare and Medicaid funding to have staff fully vaccinated. He also signed an executive order extending the requirement to contractors that work with the United States government, impacting a total of 2.1 million employees. And of course, don't forget, he also said it for the private businesses. Anybody that has 100 or more employees, they have to do it as well. Biden said all this and more while telling America that he's run out of patience for the vaccine hesitant. And obviously, he hasn't noticed that his poll numbers are flatlining. He hasn't figured out that the American people's patience is wearing thin too, but not just with him, but with each other, which I think is the goal. You would think after botching the Afghanistan exit, the president would have some kind of humility, that he might notice the national mood and adjust his words accordingly. But no, Biden is the one who's out of patience for you, because you're not doing what you're told. And the pandemic, if you're unvaccinated, is all your fault. Here's Joe Biden, who sounds like he's been day drinking, and he is in a nasty mood. Watch.
My message to unvaccinated Americans is this: what more is there to wait for? What more do you need to see? We've made vaccinations free, safe, and convenient. The vaccine has FDA approval. Over 200 million Americans have gotten at least one shot. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. So please do the right thing.
What did we get to see? Where should I start? How about the results from the study that the NIH just literally this week commissioned to understand the possible connection between menstrual irregularities and any kind of impact on reproductive health from the COVID vaccine? Yeah, those results aren't out yet because the study was literally just commissioned this week. So maybe that sounds a little alarming. Some women, I don't know, maybe would like to know more about that before deciding to have the government inject them. It's understandable. And if you respect women's autonomy, right? I mean, wouldn't he agree, Mr. President? Wouldn't you agree? So again, he asked, what are 80 million unvaxxed people waiting for? Well, millions of Americans already had it, and they have natural immunity. Now, I have to tell you, in every other situation where we have a virus, chickenpox, anything like that, in the totality of humankind's history, we have always understood, and science has always dictated with receipts, that we have a natural immunity whenever these things are contracted from other humans, etc. So why is COVID magically different? And why is the United States literally the only nation on God's green earth that ignores natural immunity when any discussion about vaccines arise? Why should we take seriously anyone in the medical or scientific community that does not include natural immunity when discussing vaccines? Consistency is a hallmark of science, and it's entirely absent from this discussion. If saving lives is the motivation for forcing people to get injections, why is there no mandate for flu shots, considering the infection fatality ratio is way higher than that of COVID? The ignoring of natural immunity by our health agencies, it makes people even more vaccine hesitant because it feels like some unseen agenda is driving the whole thing. Again, why are people waiting to get vaxxed? Biden asked. Well, some people, like me, have noticed friends getting quite sick with coronavirus even after getting double vaxxed, like my producer on my radio program who had to go into quarantine today. So we're a little hesitant, in addition to the other actual legitimate health concerns that aren't anyone's business but our own. And we've noticed that the vaccines seem to not actually inoculate people, which is like the reason you get a vaccine. So here's one more reason that people are waiting, because they can't get an answer to a simple question. If the vaccine is safe and effective, why in the ever-loving hell should the vaccinated be afraid of the unvaccinated? The president keeps saying that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Because what, more unvaccinated people are in the hospital? Okay, fine. If someone wants to pay the price for that decision, then does that affect, if it affects them, right? But the president keeps saying that the vaccine works. And by the way, there are a lot of vaccinated people that are in the hospital too. I mean, again, apparently we're the only country on God's green earth that's ignoring this. So he's pitching, saying that we have to protect the unvaccinated or the vaccinated from the unvaccinated. Well, then why get vaccinated if the protection doesn't work? Watch this.
We're going to protect vaccinated workers from unvaccinated coworkers. We're going to reduce the spread of COVID-19 by increasing the share of the workforce that is vaccinated in businesses all across America.
None of that makes sense. He's literally pitching something that he says the protection for which doesn't work. I know, you're not drunk. That's what he just said. It's like the president wants to pit Americans against each other. It's like that because he does. Why tell one group that the other group is the source of all of their problems? Isn't that what they always do? That's what Democrats always do, especially when it's not true. They want division. Instead of focusing on this virus, the virus is division. And all of this is causing vaccine hesitancy. So in any case, the president says that he's out of patience with us, but I don't think that he understands that he's presiding over a country that has lost patience with him. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, who became my new best friend with this tweet, summed it up real well, his take on the national mood. He said, quote, "Rest assured, we will fight them to the gates of hell to protect the liberty and livelihood of every South Carolinian," end quote. By the way, if your lawmakers are not repeating this pretty much verbatim, you should be rioting outside of their offices civilly, a civil riot. Don't be like Antifa, but you should be loud and you should be screaming. Not exactly kind of the response, right, that you want from half of your country after you give a speech that should help unite us during a pandemic, especially when your presidential poll numbers are in the toilet. Especially after we were told that there weren't going to be vaccine mandates. Don't worry about it. No mandates from this administration. Really? Watch.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand to be mandatory.
There will be no nationwide mandate. I was referring to mandates by private institutions and portions of the federal government. There will be no federal mandate.
One, that's not the role of the federal government.
I don't think you'll ever see a mandating of vaccine, particularly for the general public. But you would never mandate, at least I do not think you would. I'd be pretty surprised if you mandated it for any element of the general public.
I guess they changed their mind. Kind of happens when you need to distract from Afghanistan and unemployment benefits, Indy. And you know what? If it makes you angry that they lied and they're now forcing you to inject something into your body, well, too bad, apparently, because Joe Biden wants you to know it's not about your freedom. Watch.
This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you.
It's funny because the Vice President Kamala Harris literally gave a speech earlier that day that said it is about your choice with women when she was talking about Texas. So did you hear that? Mandated vaccinations aren't about your freedom. Just thinking out loud here, if I don't have the freedom to have bodily autonomy, to control injections into my body or my child's body, are you really free? This is very much exactly about freedom, Mr. President. But Angry Uncle Joe says that being forced to take a vaccine that you don't want isn't about freedom, that it's about safety. Yes, safety, that new American value that apparently takes precedent over every other value, including freedom. One of the first quotes I ever told my children and taught them and literally printed out on stuff that I set up and framed around their rooms was this one. Ben Franklin's famous quote, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety," end quote. It's like old Ben Franklin was writing about this very moment. You know, it's not like all the founding fathers stood there in Philadelphia and said, "Hey guys, none of this happens if people get sick," right? None of this counts. In any case, Biden isn't done having a word with you, anybody who's Mr. or Mrs. vaccine hesitant, not by a long shot. So here he is going back on his word, saying that he, King Biden, will force even private companies to vaccinate their 80 million employees if they have employee numbers 100 and up. Watch.
My job as president is to protect all Americans. So tonight, I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated. or show a negative test at least once a week.
Now, before I get on, I think that you have a duty to not comply. I know that I would never comply. And you should probably maybe talk with your doctor and find out if you have anything that's covered by the American Disabilities Act. Like Crohn's, for instance, is covered by ADA. You should make it absolutely hellfire painful for anyone to do this. If corporate America decides that they want to FAFO, well then okay, be their Huckleberry and FAFO. They can find out, right? So go maybe talk to an employment attorney and find out if you have anything that can be classified under ADA. Because if someone decides to get rid of you because you won't inject yourself with a vaccine whose efficacy we have no knowledge of, we don't know how long it works, we have no long-term studies, or if you just don't like vaccines, really all of that's irrelevant. If someone wants to get rid of you and wants to fire you from your position, even if you have something that's covered by ADA, wow, lawsuit heaven, make it rain. So a couple of things to understand about this too. Our president knows that there is no way that this is going to withstand legal scrutiny, and he's counting on this. In fact, this is the exact same thing that he did with the eviction moratorium. He's counting on the process. This is all just performative. He's counting on the process. He knows it's going to fail in the courts. He's going to use the time that the process takes just to do this kind of damage. This is a Hail Mary from an administration that so desperately needs a course correction after Afghanistan, and of course, right on the same day that the lockdown unemployment benefits expired. After spending months attacking Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for disallowing companies to force their employees to get injected, the same exact leftists are now celebrating Joe Biden for forcing those companies to make their employees get injected. This is neither about science nor consistency. So think about this. We went from 15 days to slow the spread to $14,000 fines and loss of your job if you refuse a government injection. Biden also announced a new mask policy, increased fines with TSA and masking. Watch.
Tonight, I'm announcing that the Transportation Safety Administration, the TSA, will double the fines on travelers that refuse to mask. If you break the rules, be prepared to pay.
I don't care if you wear a mask. I mean, if you want to wear a mask because you think that it's going to protect you from getting infected with a virus, the particle size is actually smaller than that of a smoke particle, and masks haven't been proven to actually stop transmission, and there's a handful of studies. I have receipts longer than the broadcast hours of a week's worth of these shows can provide. Then you go right ahead. It's the same thing as keeping a nightlight on in your room at night because you think it wards off the boogeyman. See, this is an administration that doesn't believe it serves you, that you serve it. It doesn't need to work through your elected representatives. It just wants to rule over you by fiat and coercion. And they've lost patience with you because you've been very bad. Jen Psaki is so over it. In fact, she doesn't even feel like she has to answer questions anymore about her bosses, her party's inconsistencies regarding the vaccine and bodily autonomy. Check it out.
What happened to my body, my choice when it comes to vaccinations in the Biden administration? And in 2020, President-elect Biden said he would not demand vaccine mandates.
No answer for you. Jen Psaki does not answer the question because there's no consistency to the administration's positions, and they don't care about real science. That's why the mandate doesn't include U.S. Postal Service workers, which number over 644,000. I guess they're a hardy bunch, right? They're just immune to the virus. I mean, they only go door to door, touch all the packages that you have to open. But hey, they don't have to get vaccinated because we care about science. Gosh, I don't have enough middle fingers for this. So is politics driving this? Of course it is. This is a rhetorical question. They don't feel the need to justify it to you. Now, a lot of people like Deborah Messing, who if you actually did a CT on her, it's just her head's full of driveway rocks, are pretending that they've heard of Jacobson v. Massachusetts. I talked about this ridiculously in depth on my program today and discussed it with my friend Andy McCarthy and wrote about it over at my newsletter on Substack. Everyone is suddenly, you know how remember everyone was a zoologist like when the Harambe thing happened, and then everyone became, every time that there's a huge controversy or subject in the news, everyone on Twitter positions themselves to know everything about it. Now, admittedly, I remember Jacobson v. Massachusetts just from a policy class in college, and then it came up again last year when churches were actually being shut down in New York and in California because Jacobson was being invoked. And in fact, Justice Gorsuch had mentioned this, even intimating at some point that it perhaps had gone too far. It's a very anachronistic ruling. Jacobson v. Massachusetts People are using this to justify and defend Biden's mandate. They're arguing that this SCOTUS, this Supreme Court precedent, allows for government-mandated vaccines. This is an entirely flawed logic. So some quick pointers on this. Number one, with Jacobson v. Massachusetts, to deny from conscientious objectors their constitutional rights and treat them like criminals because they're hesitant over a new vaccine with unclear efficacy and no long-term studies, that's an affront to this republic. Number two, Jacobson is anachronistic, and it's a ridiculous, stupid ruling that actually is from a different era. And it's used most recently to limit church gatherings, like I said, California and New York. In 1927, get this, my body, my choicers, it was used as justification in another Supreme Court case to sterilize women who were adjudicated mentally unfit, to sterilize them against their will, stating that the principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. That was Oliver Wendell Holmes and Buck v. Bell. 3 generations of imbeciles, he added, are enough. That was literally a Supreme Court quote. Number 3, Jacobson placed a nominal fine of $5, which equivalent is $150 today, and allowed for an opt-out. You could opt out of it. 4th point, Jacobson didn't push this mandate or penalty as a condition of employment. They didn't push it through the employer. And number 5, Jacobson was about a state's right. It wasn't a federal law, nor was it federalizing a state law. A dude in Massachusetts didn't want to get the smallpox vaccine and fought with the state over it. What's funny, he never actually got that vaccine. And furthermore, lastly, this was all based, Jacobson was a fight over a law. It wasn't an executive order. There's no way this survives legal scrutiny. So in any case, people can stop trotting out Supreme Court decisions that they don't understand. There's no precedent for the authoritarian mandates that Biden put into place yesterday. It is absolutely unprecedented. And the way that he spoke to the country is also unprecedented. I made the remark to a friend of mine that in my entire life, even more so than Barack Obama, I have never heard a more statist speech by a president ever. And by the way, just think about the kid gloves this administration used when talking about the Taliban. Remember, our Afghan partners, we hope that they form an inclusive government. Like we're even considering giving aid, our money. You work 3 months out of the year to pay to the Taliban. Remember all of this, all that sucking up to the Taliban? But listen to the difference, how the president talks about Republican governors, like actual fellow countrymen. Listen to this.
If they'll not help, if these governors won't help us beat the pandemic, I'll use my power as president to get them out of the way.
You will? Because that's our job, Slick. Hey, Fat, that's our job, right? Do I need to go down in the pool's basement and see if I can have some like old-timey man cut me a chain in my pool's basement? I mean, for real, like what pool has a basement? If that did not raise a red flag about his senility, then I don't know what will. But to my point, red state governors, if you don't allow the federal government to violate your people's constitutional rights, Biden's going to use his magical old man powers to get you out of the way. He threatened Republican governors. Again, like I said, this is the most statist thing I've ever heard from a sitting president, even more so than Barack Obama, which is saying a lot. This administration literally whispers sweet nothings to the Taliban. In fact, Joe whispers a lot. Is that like his new trick? But then threatens our actual governors. Fight to the gates of hell indeed. And truth is, he wasn't just threatening the governors. He was threatening you. All fun and games aside. The president does not respect the will of the voter. They don't care to represent legitimate concerns of millions of Americans like you. You and your concerns about actual science or your own health are beneath contempt. Your reasons for not getting vaccinated are nothing to this administration. They don't care what you or your family's health situation is. They don't care if you've had it before and have natural immunity. Natural immunity doesn't count in this case because it's politically inconvenient, and that's the new definition of science. And he's perfectly willing to put your back against the wall and make you choose between literally feeding your children or injecting yourself and your children with a vaccine that you have legitimate questions about. And it's funny because everything this administration accused Trump of is exactly what this administration is: authoritarian, and this is an immoral and anti-republic request. Democrats are now officially the party of the elites who routinely give the shaft to the working class. Bring me my Amazon package and make sure you're vaxxed. We don't want you making us sick. You know, that's the thing. Real quick note on that. Who were the first people that got this and ended up getting natural immunity? Do you remember all of the people who virtue signaled and they said, we don't want to murder people, so we're going to stay home and we're going to have all of our packages brought to us and we're going to have our food delivered to us and we're going to have everything handed to us? It was the people who were considered essential, the laborers, blue collar folks, the people who were loading up your food on trucks and driving it across the country, the people who were unloading it, the people who were putting the stuff on the grocery store shelves, the people who were making sure that you got your food delivered and put on the porch, the people who were at the restaurants covering themselves in plastic, making the meals so that the people who were getting them delivered could feel confident about not getting coronavirus from food when everybody knew so little about it. Those people were the ones who ended up contracting this the earliest and getting over it and having natural immunity. This is some Martha's Vineyard, white collar, elitist, blue blood crap. Well, this is still America. And millions of Americans are going to exercise their God-given constitutional right to not comply. I mean, you can physically come here to Texas and come and make me. With that speech, and these new federal vaccine mandates, I mean, the administration is making itself king. But this is America. We've dumped tea in the harbor for less, and you don't have our consent. So coming up, 20 years after 9/11, what have we learned? Former Acting Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan, joins me next to discuss. Stay with us.
Clarify on the September 11th plan. So are there plans on the day of for President Biden to actually deliver remarks on the anniversary?
It's a good question. The events are not set up that way. Because he's attending an event with several other former presidents and of course former prominent officials in the morning in New York. In order to get to all of the events, it just doesn't work that way. You will hear from him in the form of a video in advance, or if that will be available that day, I should say.
Respectfully, I don't recall any other president since 9/11 ever having that same problem. They've been to every event and they still had a live address. Apparently, President Biden is not doing one though. On the 20th observation of 9/11, a video message. Here it is 20 years later, and this is where we're at. There's a lot of stuff to discuss here. Joining me right now is Mark Morgan, former Acting Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and visiting fellow in the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at Heritage. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. I mean, I understand, just like anybody, there's going to be some, you're going to have some limitations with scheduling. However, so many other presidents previously have been able to do this. George W. Bush was able to do this. Barack Obama was able to do this. Donald Trump was able to do this. They would be in multiple states at many different events, and yet they were still able to also address the nation that weren't at any of those events and do a live response commemorating what had happened. Your thoughts on this?
Dana, the 20th anniversary of the worst terrorist attack on our homeland, and you just heard the president's secretary, it sounded like that character on Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 wah. I had no idea what she was saying. It made no sense. Of course, the answer should have been, yes, the president is going to be at ground zero live, recognizing the 20th anniversary. It should have been a no-brainer. It defies logic.
It does. And obviously it's historical because it's 20 years. And there were people who were born not after those towers fell, and who were infants when those towers fell, who are now serving our country. And it's also historical for another reason, because everything that just went down in Afghanistan with the withdrawal and where Afghanistan is now today, many people are saying we're not at square one, we're at -1. Do you agree with that assessment? And what do you think has changed in the 20 years for the better?
Yeah, I think in many ways, and Dana, if I can, you mentioned something that I think is very important, is that there are many citizens in this country that weren't even born or too young to even remember 9/11. That's why it's even more important that the president should use his bully pulpit to make sure that those that weren't born or don't remember understand the importance of that. And hearing from the president on the day of the 20th anniversary is so important. So now let's talk about, look, this country has made just incredible strides. There's two really critically important things that we have improved. One is intelligence. It's about intelligence, the understanding the importance of intelligence, understanding how to utilize an operational intelligence to not only understand the threat, but also be able to share what we don't need, to break down those barriers like between the intelligence agencies and domestic law enforcement agencies. We've come a long ways there. In addition to that, domestically, we've changed our process, both from a law enforcement and intelligence kind of approach, from being a reactive, like, a crime happens and then we investigate it, to one being being preventative and proactive in our approach to prevent it by utilizing that intelligence. But Dana, you know as well as I do, as every year goes by, the vulnerabilities don't get less, they increase and they get more sophisticated. So although we've hardened targets, we've gotten better at sharing and understanding the importance of intelligence, we still have a vast, complex set of threats facing us from outside our borders that are alive and well today.
Yes, we very much do. And how to deal with that becomes the question. Mark, one of the big topics of discussion as everyone sort of try to reconcile what was happening in the days and weeks and months after 9/11. One of the big things that came up were, how did these people get into the country and hijack our planes? How did this happen? And of course, it was the overstayed visas. Is this still a problem? Has this problem been solved?
No, it hasn't. But I can tell you, this is one thing under the Trump administration that we were looking at. We were looking at the vast amount of loopholes in our immigration system, as well as our border security issues. And, look, this president, he passed off to the Biden administration the most secure border in our lifetime. And this administration has systematically dismantled almost every effective tool, authority, and policy that we had. And there are still vulnerabilities. The visa overstays is one of them. And now, as we're looking at what's happening in Afghanistan and the hasty withdrawal and evacuation, the chaotic, failed withdrawal, we are now importing individuals into the United States that came from a terrorist country that has now returned to a terrorist base of operations without being properly vetted. And we're actually giving them legal status. Does that sound familiar? It doesn't make any sense. Again, Dana, look, we have the ability. Once we've evacuated them, their immediate harm is it's done. It's over. Go to third countries. And this DHS secretary should guarantee the American people that, in an abundance of caution, we're going to slow down, and we will not admit a single person in the United States that now has been properly vetted and we can guarantee poses no risk or harm to the United States. This secretary, this administration can't do that. Right now, they're doing the opposite.
Yeah, very much doing the opposite. Talking with Mark Morgan, and the sad thing is that we had so much time to do that before, especially as Biden was changing around the dates. I know there was a lot of discussion about what Trump did and didn't do. I know one thing that he didn't do was he would have kept a line that he drew in the sand for Taliban. That's for sure. But when Biden started changing the dates, winning this 9/11 optic, and then decided to go ahead, shut down the embassy, get people evacuated, all of this before any processing of those SIVs, getting out the individuals who had been helpful, people who were still stuck in that sometimes like 8-year-long process of having all of that gone through. None of that, nothing was even done to expedite it. And of course, Congress really had no idea until it was kind of dropped on them that this is what the administration was doing. So do we even know, Mark, how many people as a result of that? I mean, I know that the administration can't tell us how many Americans are left in Kabul, but do we know how many people, how many of these refugees brought in? We still haven't gotten to the point where we can completely and thoroughly vet everything with their paperwork, their documentation, et cetera. Because again, as you were suggesting, it's kind of ironic what we're dealing with here leading up to 9/11, 20 years later.
Yeah, Dana, you're spot on. I couldn't have said it better myself. Look, right now they're misdirecting, and they're not being honest with the American people. Look, we all know, and I think we all are on board with. We have a moral obligation to help those Afghans that actually risk their lives to help soldiers, right? I think that's a no-brainer. But that's a very small number, the SIV, the Special Immigrant Visa. What they're not telling you, the overwhelming majority of people that they hastily evacuated were not SIV holders, not at all. They're Afghans are just wanting to get out of the country. The overwhelming majority of Afghans that are coming into the United States that they're given parole status are not SIV applicants or holders. They're general refugees. Look, we're already getting reports, hundreds of individuals boarded planes in Afghanistan that are on no-fly lists. Dulles in our country, an Afghan prior convicted rapist made it to the United States. Right now, we're hearing about how a lot of older Afghan males are claiming to be married to very young Afghan brides. without proper documentation. Look, we could devote a whole hour to all the issues. But at the end of the day, Dana, I think you're right. I think this is about, they're trying to address and distract the bad political optics of the evac to say, oh, look at all that we're doing for these poor, at-risk, vulnerable people. Meanwhile, once again, America's last, everybody else is first.
Yeah, it's so awful to see this, and it's so sad. And then I just read this story. Last thing, Mark, I just read the story the other day how there was a number of actual American citizens, and they had gone through the process. They had started in Afghanistan. They had worked with our military. They were informants. They put their lives on the line, their families' lives on the line. They were interpreters, and they weren't able to get clearance by the State Department to even leave.
Look, Dana, here's what this administration knew. They knew that the rigorous process and the time it takes to adequately vet somebody. They knew that. It takes months, if not more than a year, to properly vet somebody, even somebody that has applied to be an SIV. That's a fact. In fact, the first 3 months of this year, a great majority of SIV applicants were denied because there were issues and there were fraud. They knew that was going to take a long time to do this vetting process, yet they still held firm with this arbitrary deadline, knowing full well that there was no way that they would have enough time to properly vet everyone that had a legitimate SIV application, not to mention the at-risk people. It's absolutely unconscionable.
Unbelievable. And we're going to be feeling the effects of this for so long. Mark Morgan, thank you so much for what you do and what you continue to do. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Next up, hijacking history. There's a push to avoid telling the truth about 9/11. You're not going to, it's like the wokening of American history. For instance, you're supposed to avoid talking about the religion of the attackers or what their motivations were, if you can believe it. Dave Brat is here next to discuss this. How much equity do you have in your home? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity they have, the greater the chance criminals will target them. Home title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes, and Home Title Lock, America's home leader in title protection, is warning homeowners that they could already potentially be a victim and not know it. So here's how. Cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. They find your home's online title, forge your signature stating that you sold your home, and take out loans with your equity. Insurance or common identity theft programs will not cover you. Protect your most valuable asset. Register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim. Receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value for free. Visit HometitleLock.com. The Virginia Department of Education is attempting to hijack 9/11 history by avoiding uncomfortable truths, like who attacked our country, why did they attack our country. Dean of Business at Liberty University and former Virginia Representative Dave Brat is here to discuss this and much more. Former Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it. And I have to ask, why is that, this might be rhetorical, why is it a sensitive thing to explain to people this is what the motivations of the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11, this is what those motivations were?
Yeah, well, everything in modern politics devolves to power and money, of course, and knowledge is the key to power. Politically, education is the source. The left has been relentless, first getting rid of this, that, and the other thing. And they knew, they were smart. All the college testing boards and everything waited for religion and philosophy for the coup de grace. So that's the last, because that covers first principles. And that's what I'm sure we'll dig into.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, avoiding American exceptionalism. I was looking at some of my notes for this. It was a 2-hour-long video. It was up online forever, and I learned today, just took it down. I guess they were getting a lot of flack for this. It was put up by the American University School of Education. That had a professional lecturer, and she was telling teachers, this is how we do a culturally sensitive 9/11. That's the thing, though. Doesn't presenting this as, well, we're going to speak about this in a culturally sensitive way. There were a lot of Muslims that were killed on 9/11, and there are still a lot of Muslims that are killed by terrorists who are Muslim. So I would think that that's pretty multicultural.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm in favor of multiculturalism. And of course, their sensitivities only accrue to the folks they want to be sensitive to. They never want to be sensitive to the greatest, most free country with the most rights embedded in law. to protect the imago Dei, the image of God in all people, men, women of all color, etc., embedded in individual rights in law. And so, going way back, this cultural sensitivity, the Islamic scholars, they had great scholars, the Aristotelian scholars back in the 12th and 13th century, who we could all, Jews, Christians, Muslims, were all talking together using Aristotle as the common denominator. Of course, he's out. And Islam has never gone through the Reformation or the Enlightenment. They don't have a Jefferson or a Madison, and they don't have a constitution which protects everyone individually with rights.
Now, you make a good point. They may have had a Jefferson or a Luther or a Madison or somebody, I don't know. They may have had somebody like that, but they probably killed him. They probably dangled him from a Black Hawk or, who knows what, hung him from a bridge. I mean, it's quite possible. Talking with former Congressman Dave Brat here on this whole issue of what this one lecturer and Virginia Department of Education looking at this too. You were mentioning first principles, and this is one of the things that's always in the back of my mind when I see these, because we're going through in our American culture, we're going through what China did with the Maoist Cultural Revolution. So all of these former iconic things, everything has to be torn down. All of these pillars of freedom, everything that defined America as America, e pluribus unum, our identifying factor being liberty, not religion or ethnic identity or anything else, but do you want to be free, yes or no? All of that is being just deconstructed to be rebuilt into probably something a little bit closer to Maoist vision.
Yeah, or worse, right? They're really ducking the question of Sharia law, right? And so the Cairo doctrine back in 1990, developed by all Islamic states, right? Not just the Islamic terrorists, etc., but by all the Islamic states, said, yes, we believe in rights, but they're rights as defined by Sharia. So they're not Western rights that you and I share. So they use that language that covers a multitude of sins. But in Sharia, they very explicitly say that all rights in law are governed and subject to their interpretation by the religious elites and by Sharia law. And you will never hear that taught in education classes, right? Or in any classes, because that's damaging to the leftist agenda.
That's a really good point. Here in Dallas, Texas, where I live, just a suburb that's outside of Dallas, there was a big fight. Actually, it was current Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne, who was former mayor there of Irving, Texas. There was a move to establish that Islamic jurisprudence, Sharia law, within Irving, and there were a lot of people concerned about it because women don't have equal representation, if any representation, under Sharia. There's a lot more, but it felt like there were a lot of people who didn't understand what that even was, as you were just alluding to. It's not actually explained in classrooms. It's not discussed, which I thought that's where information freely flowed, but it doesn't. Your thought?
Yeah, well, I hate to beat a dead horse, but it all comes down to the mainstream media as well, right? There's no reporting, there's no journalism, there's no education, there's no critique of the left agenda, the leftist agenda, right, which is Marxist. Marx is juxtaposed against Adam Smith, right? Adam Smith is a great Enlightenment figure, goes along with Jefferson, Madison, free markets, individual rights, Scottish Reformation, Scottish Enlightenment, and he signed, the Orthodox Christian statements back in his day at the university, like at Harvard, which was dedicated, truth for Christ and church when Harvard was founded. So juxtaposed against that, you have Karl Marx, who says there is no God. Rights language is a tool propagated by capitalist elites. We have to get rid of that. We have to get rid of rights. We have to get rid of God, and just trust us, the leaders, right? Put us in power and everything will be just swimming. And of course, everything they touch turns into totalitarian repression.
Yeah, I think, I like the way that Trump said your statement just then too, a little bit differently. Everything woke touches turns to, yes, and you're correct. Yep. Which brings me to this question. I've been thinking, I know semantics is important at certain points. Optics is incredibly important. Our word choices are important. And certain words obviously invoke certain things. Are we doing our position a disservice by calling it woke, by calling it wokery, by labeling it like that, instead of saying that calling it what it really is, which is like we were, like this cultural revolution, whether it's Sharia, Maoism, whatever. It's all pretty much the same part of the same dog.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's a very important point. We need to call it exactly what it is. Marx laid out the cookbook and the steps to follow, and the left is achieving every step, just step by step by step. First, you get rid of God, then you get rid of the Constitution and the rule of law. You go after the police. You go after free market markets. All the Fortune 500 companies are woke, as you say. But really what that means is that they're cowardly. They will not stand up and defend the basic rights I hope we still all believe in. It all depends on how the questions are posed, and the mainstream media and big tech, right, has a monopoly. The big tech, the big 6 firms in the U.S. have a market cap. They're worth more than all European firms combined. And so stew on that for a minute, and you'll see where we're heading.
Wow, unbelievable. Dave Brat, former Congressman Dave Brat, good to see you. Again, it's good to see you. And I appreciate also our shared appreciation of 80s rock. So very much we were talking about that before we actually joined everybody else. Thank you so much. Good to talk with you. Would love to see you again.
Thanks for the deep dive, Dana. Great job. Great show.
Of course. Thank you. Well, folks, if you thought that America was becoming a dystopian nightmare, here's some take courage. Australia is much worse. Like a lot worse. This is insane. You're going to think I'm lying to you, and I promise you I'm not. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. They develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus that they learned while serving our nation. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. So in 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported all the way from Colombia and Brazil and carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They even have a signature roast called Lava Panther. Lava Panther. Directly sourced from a small farm in Guatemala. Although the temperatures are cooling off, don't forget to keep enjoying the great outdoors, fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. And the best way to do it, join the Black Rifle Coffee Club. And when you join, your select brew is roasted, packaged, and shipped free right to your door. You'll also get special discounts, gain access to exclusive products, and a lot more. Purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/Dana. Use code Dana at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. So these days, the authoritarianism and dystopian policies and forced vaccinations and digital passports, that's just the tip of the iceberg, especially if you live in Australia. First, they built the COVID quarantine camps. I can't do that accent, in Australia. And that's not creepy or anything. And now, Australia increasingly looks a bit like East Germany, like a lot, under commie rule. I'm not even kidding. Take a look at this clip from Sky News Australia. Watch this.
There have been heartwarming scenes on the Queensland-New South Wales border as separated families united to celebrate Father's Day. Hundreds of people lined up along the plastic barriers, sharing a meal with loved ones. Some brought tables and chairs to spend the day catching up with family members cut off by hard border measures. New South Wales residents are currently locked out of the Sunshine State, with interstate travellers forced into 2 weeks of hotel quarantine. Queensland police have continued to monitor the border barricades, but have said police are focused on compassion over compliance on Father's Day.
Heartwarming? They had one fatality. That's what happened. How about depressing? Celebrating Father's Day while standing on opposite sides of a plastic border wall. So what in the world, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot's happening there? Okay, so Australia, like America, is composed of states, 6 of them. And because of the Delta outbreak, Australia isn't allowing interstate travel between certain states. So in this case, you can't travel between New South Wales and Queensland. So apparently, in one particular city, the border between those 2 states runs right down the middle of the city. So if you're on one side, you're not allowed to go to the other side. Why? Because of the Delta outbreak, of course. Now, the Queensland police are quite serious about stopping cars from traveling between the 2 cities, thus the plastic wall and $5,000 fines. But not to worry, the Queensland police are focused on compassion over compliance. So they're allowing people to hug or maybe share a meal together along the plastic barrier. The absurdity of it all had some Australians in an uproar. Here's what some Aussies had to say about it on Twitter. Really wish I could do this accent. So families can meet at the Queensland-New South Wales border, hug, exchange gifts, share a meal, but can't cross. How does this make sense? I am confused. That's one. And another one tweeted, if the footage of families on the border hugging each other over waist-high barriers doesn't present as 100% BS, what does? End quote. That's not a knife. This is a knife. Their frustration, of course, is more than understandable. That scene doesn't even seem real. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, wow, COVID must be really bad there right now. I mean, to separate families and make them celebrate Father's Day while standing on opposite sides of a plastic wall, the outbreak must be really bad. Yes, the virus must be killing hundreds, if not thousands. Actually, no, literally they had 10 fatalities. When they first started the lockdown, it was based on 1 fatality. They've had 10 fatalities, that's it. 6 the day before. So it looks like 0 deaths from COVID so far today. So in a country of over 25 million, those statistics are enough to stop families literally in the same city from actually physically touching on Father's Day. This is what happens when safety becomes more important than freedom. You lose all the things that make life worth living. And as Australians are finding out, you can have all the safety in the world, but if you're trapped behind the walls and unable to live freely, safety doesn't amount to much. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.